Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the KAKTUS Poetry Open Mic from Placitas, New Mexico, just north of Albuquerque. And we have a couple of terrific features tonight. Before we get started, I did want to read a poem in memory, in honor of a friend of ours who died just a few days ago, Marge Merrill from Buffalo. And we used to have an annual weekend poets retreat in the Finger Lakes of Western Central New York called Cloudburst. And Marge, was just such a treasure. She added so much to that gathering every year. And her first chapbook came out from Foothills Publishing last fall called There's Music in the Rattle of the Chains. And I just wanted to read one poem by Marge Merrill called Buddha in Jeans. Tonight, the coffee is bottomless, full flavored, with a well-rounded toasted oak finish. Caffeine does not work at this hour. 5 minutes from now, I could sleep easily. But the journal sits spotlit, a bare stage. Pen in hand, I pull apart an orange, hoping for symbolic entrails to read. The idea department gave up hours ago and went out for 10-cent wings with Buddha. I can only imagine the plates of sucked clean chicken bones, a beery muse editorializing as the Phillies spanked the Nationals. Buddha in jeans and Mona Lisa smile, a useless wingman, perfectly content with just the celery. So that's Marge Merrill, and you can get a copy of her chapbook, There is Music in the Rattle of the Chains, at the Foothills Publishing website. Thank you. Anyway, she'll definitely be missed. So we have, I guess, some good news to report here, that we've had 3 days of substantial rain after an historic drought. There is problems with flooding and so forth in various areas of New Mexico, but I guess we'll take it considering the alternative, and hopefully it's put out most of the forest fires and so forth. So something to celebrate. We have two readers. To start things out, they'll each read for 20 minutes, and then open mic. The open mic again, everyone reads one poem. So we'll try to get this moving. Let's see. So our two features are Grace Bauer and Hilda Raz, and Grace is going to read first. She's joining us from Lincoln, Nebraska, where she's the Aaron Douglas Emerita Professor of English and Creative Writing at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And both Grace and Hilda were colleagues in Nebraska. So it's nice to see them together. Grace will be reading from a new book, Unholy Heart, New and Selected Poems. And she also is the author of Meantime and The Women at the Well, and co-editor of a very interesting anthology called The Nasty Women Poets, an unapologetic anthology of subversive verse from Lost Horse Press. So welcome, Grace Bauer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to Jules for inviting me. And to John, congratulations to Daryl, and thanks to everyone for showing up. And it's a pleasure for me to read with Hilda again. We were colleagues for many years, and we continue to support each other as much as we can. And I think she gives me more support than I give her most of the time, but so it's always a pleasure to read with her. I will be reading from my book, Unholy Heart. I always have trouble holding it up correctly, which is a new and selected poems. So there are selections from 5 previously published books and then some new poems. And when I was organizing this reading, often I have gone book by book, sometimes from the oldest to the newest, sometimes from the newest to the oldest. And I, for whatever reason, I was just feeling a little more eclectic today. So I'm going to be jumping around. And I'll start with a poem that is set in the location. In my book, Nowhere All at Once, there's a number of prayer poems. They're pretty snarky prayer poems, but they are prayer poems. And this one is called Great Plains Prayer. And I'm not from the Great Plains originally. I'm from Pennsylvania and lived a number of years in the South, in New Orleans and in Appalachian, Virginia. So I have a back and forth sort of relationship to the Great Plains, even though I've lived here for 25 years now. So, Great Plains Prayer. Bless us, O Lord, and this our jello, our corn, our steaks and kolaches, our heat indexes, our wind chills, our sunsets and horizons, our endless waves of grain and grass, our ancestors who started out for the coast but stopped halfway, our nostalgia for their calico, their sod, their old homesteads, our denial of the meth labs that have taken their place. Bless our perseverance, our unerring politeness, our red state politics, and our white bread. Bless our dubious status as Tornado Alley, as flyover zone, and bless all those who fly over, as well as those of us who, out of choice or necessity or inertia, forgive us, we know not why or what we've done, but by God stayed. One of the things that happens I guess it happens all over the country, but I'd never had it happen with Mormons coming to your door on a Saturday morning to try to convert you. On the East Coast, you certainly have people happening. It's usually Jehovah's Witnesses. In the South, it's various evangelical groups who will show up at your doorstep to convert you, but I had never had that happen with Mormons until I moved to Lincoln. And so, and it just happened to be these very young, fresh-faced kids who, looked like they were about 12 or something. And they introduced themselves as elders, which just kind of cracked me up. And so I decided to kind of play with that. So it's called Latter-day Saints. They introduce themselves as elders, these 3 fresh-faced boys whose knock has roused me from my bed, but blush bright red when I say grace and extend my hand as if I were the one who had come to witness or solicit for the Lord. It is no doubt the devil in me who takes pleasure in their obvious discomfort and keeps me babbling on about Buddha, the goddess, my brand new deck of tarot cards. But hell, it may do them a world of good to see temptation in a black robe and sweat socks, sleep still sticky in the corners of her eyes. I may save them from a fate worse than the fire and brimstone they came to warn me about, or at least from the Doberman chained like Cerberus to the rickety wrought iron next door. Once I took heaven literally myself and practiced what I'd say to the angel at the gates when I arrived. I forget now what words I settled on. Something clever and direct, as I recall, that would not sound like mere excuses for the failures I knew. Even as a child, I would accumulate before that final trumpet blast when we would rise from our graves like bad actors in B movies to shuffle toward the clouds, where God, looking like Charlton Heston before he sold his soul to the NRA, would sit on his ethereal throne, scary, but nice enough to let me in. I want to tell all these speechless preachers that I am not beyond believing. Far from it, I refuse to be agnostic about anything except the events I see unfold day to day before my eyes. Whether they'd call that sin or salvation, I don't know. And they're far too anxious now to escape from my tirade to explain. They back off, just slow enough to stay within the bounds of politeness, inching away from my sermon till I am left alone in my pulpit, mumbling to the welcome mat. As I kneel to retrieve today's journal star, the morning sun glints gold as a halo, and I'll be damned if I don't claim it as my own. And that is from my book, Retreats and Recognitions. So I'm going to jump now to a poem. I thought this would be an interesting segue, perhaps. And this is from my book, Meantime, which was published by the University of New Mexico Press. So it has that connection to New Mexico. And it's about an experience I had when I was in Europe a number of years ago and saw a lot of art, but one day ran into this man who we were in a cathedral, it was fairly empty, and he was dusting an angel. And somehow his image stayed with me more than the Van Goghs, more than all this stuff. I just became obsessed with this man. And so months later, wrote this poem about him, Dusting the Angel. Mid-afternoon, the cathedral hushed except for the click of our heels on the floor's solid, polished stone. What little light the dingy day provides illuminates stained glass Madonnas, saints you can't identify, and the names of local patrons whose money guaranteed they'd be commemorated, if not saved. You wander down what aisles aren't cordoned off to casual viewers, admiring the craftsmanship and patience it took to erect an edifice like this, a century or more in the making. Generations of the faithful preceded, confident the work would someday be completed, though they, like Moses, might never enter the promised land of it alive. Lights flicker vigils in crimson cups, and post-mass incense lingers in the air, haunting you back to a childhood when you worshipped in pews not unlike the one you stopped to rest in now. More certain then of heaven than you were of the astronauts the nightly news assured you would be landing any day now on the moon. Absorbed in what's past for a moment, you almost miss the man kneeling right in front of you, not praying, but so intent he might as well be as he works his way methodically down an outstretched wing with a small, dry paintbrush, gently flicking dust from the grooves of each finely chiseled feather. The statue's face is smooth, serene, her blank eyes angled toward the vaulted ceiling, which shimmers with gold leaf stars on cobalt blue to remind us of a heaven that lies beyond the visible sky. You wonder if he believes in it, that tender of angels who you dream of days later on the plane flying homeward, the precise gestures of his hands as imprinted in your mind as the paintings you fought your way through crowds to gaze at, marveling at what the artists have brought to life on canvas, brushstroke by brushstroke, some communion between imagination and act, hand and eye, evolving into each masterpiece you viewed with a reverence that seemed its due. aloft and hovering now between continents, between time zones, observation and aftermath. Where you are seems as ethereal as our grasp of eternal. Yet you know it's as real as that man in his khakis and gray cardigan, maintaining the sacred by performing the mundane. Perhaps he sees his task as a ritual of devotion, or could it be for him just a job like any other, what he does to earn a living, as we all must in this world? Outside the smudged square of your window, a rising sun gently reddens the horizon, glints off the wings of the jet that is carrying you back to your own ordinary, a list of obligations already adding up in your head, all those to-dos clamoring so loudly for attention, they drown out the call to do work that feels more worth your while, the necessary angel that might ground you in the act of doing and make time matter or fly. A lot of this religious stuff comes out of 9 years of Catholic school, and perhaps that culminated in what ended up being the first book I published. It was not the first book I wrote, but it was the first book that got published. And that book is called The Women at the Well. It was originally published in 1996 and then reissued an anniversary edition in 2016. So I'll read the title poem from that, and it's called The Women at the Well. And all the poems in this book are persona poems written in the voices of various women from the Bible. And this title poem is not one woman speaking, but a chorus of women, because that trope or scene of various meetings at the well, whether it's, you know, Jesus meeting the woman at the well, or it just happens often in both the Old and New Testaments. So this is all of them speaking en masse. The Women at the Well. We enter on cue, bearing prophecy, earthen vessels waiting to be filled, directions to the homes of fathers, brothers, husbands, who always take you in and treat you well. And we are taken in by your telling, tales of how one learns to walk in a foreign land, moments past recalled by one who never watched them happen, plots still being written in which we wait for our names to appear. We hear most when we are least observed, so we are often silent, serving the choicest meats from our larders, the saltiest olives, sweetest breads, red wines from deep in our cellars, where we carefully rinse the bottles clear of dust. We always fill your cup before it is quite empty. We have learned how to keep strangers talking, our own thirsts quenched. This is what keeps us returning each day to the circle of women, drawing buckets from the circle of stone at the center of town. We soak clothing, refresh weary livestock, wet our lips, composing our own stories as we wait for our reflection in the mirror of water to speak what we have always known. I will read the title poem of this whole collection, Unholy Heart, and it's from a book. It's from a book called Retreats in Recognition, and this poem is called Retreat. And in my final year, 8th grade at Our Lady of Hungary School, when we were going to be going off, most of us were going off to public schools in which we would be introduced to, according to our nuns, you know, heathens and communists. As a last-ditch effort, they sent us on a retreat to a Carmelite monastery for a long weekend, and it was girls from our school and another school nearby, and it was intended to sort of embed holiness in us. Except they sent us with this school, with these girls from this school that was from a much larger town, and those girls like new stuff that we didn't know. And so it sort of had the opposite effect than what they were intending. So retreats. The novices led us in prayer and solemn novenas. Their silence and black habits trailed the cloister's corridors. But we were tired of the protection of Our Lady of Hungary and took off with the St. Joe's crowd, who taught us how to inhale Lucky Strikes, shake aspirins into Cokes for a buzz. A senior from Perpetual Help explained to us what fuck meant, diagramming the details on the back of her missal during a morning high mass. I daydreamed through the offertory and the consecration, wanting to witness the miracle of a boy's body doing what I now knew men did. When the bells chimed, I lined up for communion with the other girls, though the sin I had in mind was surely mortal. I crossed myself as the priest whispered, "Body of Christ," in my unholy heart. I knew there was no turning back. So I think that's my 20 minutes. So thank you all for coming and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Grace. That was terrific. And the last poem brought back some memories of parochial school as well. Anyway, thank you so much. We are moving from Nebraska back to New Mexico, actually to just about a mile or two west of here, and where Hilda Raz lives. And Hilda will be reading from Letters from a Place I've Never Been, New and Collected Poems, 1986 to 2020. Hilda Raz is a former editor of Prairie Schooner and was named the first Luschei Professor and Editor in the Department of English at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So there's the Lincoln connection. She is the series editor for the Mary Burritt Christiansen poetry series of University of New Mexico Press, poetry editor of ABQ in print and Bosque Press. And Hilda Raz is the author or editor of 14 books, including Liston's Story, Trans, All Odd and Splendid, Divine Honors, What Happens, and the memoir, What Becomes You, with Aaron Raz Link. And I hope you'll have a very warm welcome for Hilda Raz. You can unmute, Hilda.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Okay. Thank you very much, John. What a pleasure to be here tonight with Grace. I love the poems that she read. I know her work well. We taught together in the same PhD program at the University of Nebraska, and our students are poets. You've been listening to, some of whom are in our audience. I want to thank, pardon me, Jules Nyquist and John Roach, how their series has grown and grown and brings us poets, good audiences. For years, I taught Grace Bauer's wonderful books to our students in the PhD program at the University of Nebraska, and I'm so glad to be here tonight with her in Placitas, New Mexico, although she's still in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'll be reading a poem or two that's also set in Lincoln, Nebraska. But I'd like to begin, as Grace did, with a prayer, but it is set here in our desert, and it begins, "Dear God, you make green our desert, the jackrabbit to leap there, the mechanisms of birth and death that shrivel, mucus to heal and the shine of secretions, okra and cactus, mold that devours the stem, avoids the flower for a day. Even the eaten lobes pour forth their buds. You are the author of stars and their long light. You made us to bear children out of great pleasure. You provided the starch in the collar of our womb. So also you opened it. Let our children who are grown prevail. Let them have what they will, your earth. Let them go forth. And let those who pay authors with substance choose them. Tomorrow is my birthday. You made my mother, Devorah, give birth when she was said to be barren. In a storm, you gave her strength enough to hold up the lamp over the kitchen table for the doctor who saved her infant son, who then became a man who studied stars, who died young, who left behind 2 daughters who now study stars. I am withering in my age, yet you have made a door outside of which rattlesnake, primrose, the miraculous spider the size of my palm, flower amidst the sand. You who are beyond names gave us names to praise, so we will name until the ends of our days. Let our children also praise as they go forth to deliver. Let your creation be a motto, your healing shine, your connections, tarantula. And we do have tarantulas here, the size of my hand. To acknowledge my new and collected poems, which is just monstrously big, I thought that I would read the program that Kwame Dawes, who is the editor of this book, suggested to me. I thought, that's cracked. And yet here it is for your pleasure, I hope. When I was a child, my father put his arm through a window at work. This poem comes from a prompt that poet Rick Jackson invented. And the poem is called Risk on page 423. I have to look to find it. Here it is, Risk, after Rick Jackson. My father's hands are broad and scarred, index fingers nail replaced by a whorl of hard tissue. He is prying open a stuck window. By the ocean, children are broaching high waves, mounting and falling like foam. Father, why don't you raise your head? See the putty in the old frame begin to powder, the glass begin to shatter. Child, he says, what matter the tendons in the arm when the whole body is made of salt and water? He didn't say that, of course, but I like to imagine he did. Echo is on page 417. Here it is. I was fascinated by the sounds that we hear in the mountains. Echo has an epigraph from Elliott Carter, the great musician, who died when he was 101. And he wrote music until 2 weeks before his death. Something is happening to my body, Elliott Carter. Something is happening to my body, I tell my son on the telephone. He knows about my new hip, has seen the incision. He cared for me like an infant. My body is walking, happening, I tell the physical therapist as he stretches out hips, a thin line on skin, all that's left. Happening body is really something, I tell my companion as we climb the hill's lip. The decision to mend wasn't mine. My body cares for me as it has. Is to my body as breath, this hip, these arms that rise. The wind tries to blow me over, but what happens is balance. Something happened to my body. Something mends an echo in air. This is a poem called Nobody Teaches Life Anything, and it's dedicated to John Link, who told me the epigraph, page 425. Nobody teaches life anything. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Are you nobody too? Dickinson asked. I didn't want to be nobody, but I was. put to bed at a certain time for ages, then sent to bed by myself. I ate what they did. A lazy student, I sucked up escape in storybooks. Nobody taught me except how to read and swim. I'm somebody now, but not available to teach life anything. Sorry. What do I know? The fragments that flash? Papa casting his fishing weights in an arc over the yellow rings at Cobb's Hill Pond? To stand and push hard on the pedals of my back bike to fly? My brother's big hand in my little one, mother's green brooch, the white silk sheath dress I wore under graduation robes. Don't tell. Shortly before my being banished, the shower moved in an arc down, my hip broke. Thereafter followed many months of limping. Life didn't stop. Did you think it would? I'm a good teacher, but as that famous writer said, nobody teaches life anything. Life keeps moving, an infinity pool, falling invisibly over some edges. While I'm waiting for an edge, summer unfolds her largesse. Today, a golden skink wriggled his body over the welcome mat. Walking a gravel road with a cane, I saw a rabbit race one side to the other. He was just born, that tiny. Are these chapter lessons from life? I'd like to teach life how to stop Job's brain cancer. But that's the point, isn't it? Life knows everything and doesn't care or can't stop. As we're learning to see edges, life keeps flowing and going and racing and pulsing, and best to do is to keep eyes and ears open for hints of what's coming. Or maybe the point is spring's plenitude, which includes sugar ants and roaches, and, well, you get it, an infinite dump puzzle. Life knows everything from birth to war, to building a wall that comes down and goes up, comes down and goes up again. Maybe I'm moseying around time's pool in my coral swimsuit, watching for death to put his booted foot over the lip of, no, not the pool, but my bedroom window, coming in without asking when I was 6. I talked him out of taking me then. He promised to come back later, not wait forever. The next poem I'd like to read is called Diaspora. It's a pantoum, which is a Malaysian form I like. It's on page 257. I had to write that all down, 257. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is, Diaspora. I was born during World War II, and I was thinking of the Holocaust. Diaspora. The gates were closing and the time was light in spite of our efforts in the car. Our suitcases packed, our coats tossed off, goodbyes said or not to be said in spite of our efforts in the car. The houses closed, the plants farmed out, goodbyes said or not to be said, the neighbors told, the little ones in their beds. The houses closed, the plants farmed out, the station doors opening on uniform corridors. The neighbors told, the little ones in their beds. We fanned our faces, opened our books. The station doors opening on uniform corridors. Then there was smoke and damp and sky. We fanned our faces, opened our books. We shut the windows, began to move. Then there was smoke and damp and sky. Our suitcases packed, our coats tossed off. We shut the windows, began to move. The gates were closing and the time was late. The next poem Kwame liked and wanted me to read is on page 191. The name of this poem is Names My Mother Knew, Names My Mother Knew, and that's just what the poem is, a catalog of names. Hinda for Hilda, her mother, and me, and also the cousin with freckles and the red-haired pixie we visited by boat the summer her mother, Vivian, was pregnant with Peter. Skizix, her name for my embryonic brother, awash and safe in her tough interior. Then Jimmy, the toddler, James, the professor, and graveside, his full measure, Barton James Ash, buried again, perfectly safe. Aaron, her daddy, our papa, and Frank, from childhood, her beloved. Her sisters, Anne, Jane, Phyllis, and the dolly she was, David, her brother. The nicknames she called us, Shepsily, little sheep for me, and the habit before sleep of the catalog of the loved ones called to God's attention. Rosetta, who helped her clean Harvard Street. George, who set the screens, washed windows, scared us with his false teeth. Dr. Wolins, who diagnosed mumps. Dr. Kerschel, who straightened teeth. Mr. Thumb, who lived in my mouth. She whispered his name before she pulled him out. Mr. Eastman's house. Palmyra, the ice cream place. Canandaigua for hot dogs and hamburgers, onion rings. Geneseo Hospital, where we were born. Nana, she was to her grandchildren. Devorah, her Hebrew name. Parkinson's patient 723 in the medical study. West End Lane, her Hampstead address. The Flandre, a ship she sailed on. Lost with the rest, her favorite novels, all foxed, gone. And this is the last poem I'll read. During my tenure at the University of Nebraska, and some of you may have heard me read this poem, I worked for the NEA in the Artists in the Schools program. Many of you may remember it, or maybe you don't know it, but the NEA through the states gave money for those of us, poets and other artists, to teach in the public schools. This poem is one of many that returns to that experience of teaching in outstate Nebraska. I grew up in Rochester, New York. I went to school in Boston, Massachusetts. I had never been to Nebraska. I had never been living in Lincoln, the capital, in outstate Nebraska. This is Spring Again, rural Nebraska, page 397. Spring Again, rural Nebraska. The history teacher is going to Russia, he tells me in the library, where I'm looking for an atlas to discover what's become of Moscow. He comes back to explain differences among evangelical, Orthodox, Protestant, and Catholic church services. In one, liturgy, the focus and icons. In another, the sermon. In the third, communion, which is the Mass. I say I understand. He explains to a Jew the uses of icons. Along with the text of liturgy, they are holy and evoke holiness in all humankind. Icon and liturgy in Greek, picture and word. The library is cool and smells of yeast rising. Cinnamon rolls cook is baking for lunch. A teacher comes in for the video camera. The 8th graders are making a film, The Life of Our High School, for 7th graders coming to register here next month. The teacher explains to me the film will be their map. Fluorescent tubes hum. I'm in a Christian community, the gym teacher tells me at lunch. He is an Adventist, he says when I ask why he too doesn't eat the ham. My teacher has trouble with his wife. She tells me in the hall they've had a tough winter, but the kids are ready to go now if he wants to move to a larger school. She's small, carries a football under her arm. As she turns, I pat the shoulder of her powder blue parka. She turns to pat me back. Today is Friday. We eat fish. I vacated the basement apartment of the principal and his wife this fourth time I've stayed, vacuumed. Flannel sheets from the bed, the towel and washcloth bunched into the used pillowcase in the laundry room. After class, I drive out through hazy dust, air thick with pollen, home in time for dinner with friends. We sign our tax forms, mail them, drink a little, and hope we've got it right. Why do I love this life? This year, the small birds are migrating. No snow geese and whooping cranes, too late. But I'm back on the Central Flyway. Masses of dark birds in air last night. Grackles, wind high, sky clear, but no, farther into the country, beyond the tracks, standing still in a field, I saw robins and meadowlark, finch and red-winged blackbirds, juncos and cardinals, then a dun one, barred at eye and throat I've never seen before. Great waves hitting the twilight, the air thick with their singing. For Nebraska. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so glad to see you here.
Thank you, Hilda. That was wonderful. And the penultimate poem reminded me, I noticed a lot of place names because I lived in Avon, New York, and on Canisius Lake for 20 years or more.
Right.
So, yeah. Anyway, that was great. Can we all unmute and give our two features a hearty round of applause?
Hello. Thank you
Thank
so
you, everyone.
much. That was wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you all for being here. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Hilda. Wonderful. Just wonderful.
Grace.
Delightful. Yeah. So good.